In the rigid world of military hierarchy, a whispered joke over a cigarette was just a moment of levity. But when a young, sharp-eared signals analyst named Maya repeated that joke back to her commanding officer, she unwittingly quoted a sequence of numbers that didn't exist in any training manual. Those numbers were a ghost, a spectral code buried so deep it was meant to stay forgotten. Now, with a single casual sentence, Maya has thrown open a vault of secrets that threatens to unseat a decorated captain, dismantle a decades-old lie, and put a target squarely on her own back. This is not a story of battlefields, but of a war fought in whispers, where the most powerful weapon is a truth that was never supposed to be heard. The air in the confined signals analysis room was perpetually stale, recycled, and tasting faintly of dust and overheated electronics. The soft, rhythmic chatter of Morse code and the blur of encrypted digital streams on multiple monitors provided a hypnotic, if monotonous, soundtrack to specialist Maya Rao's 12-hour shift. At 24, she was the youngest and newest member of the team, her keenness yet to be worn down by the routine. Her world was one of patterns, anomalies, and the silent language of machines and covert operators. Captain James Thorne was a figure carved from granite and Army regulations. A veteran of 2 covert campaigns, his reputation was spotless, his command style firm but fair. He moved through the base with the quiet authority of someone who had seen enough to deserve it. To Maya, he was less a person and more an institution, the unmovable object at the top of her very small world. It happened during a rare, shared moment of inertia. The main surveillance feed had gone quiet for recalibration, granting a 5-minute window of dead air. Maya stepped out into the sharp evening for a breath, finding Captain Thorne already there, leaning against the sun-warmed concrete wall, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He offered a curt nod, a minor concession to shared humanity. Trying to bridge the immense rank gap, Maya gestured to the gleaming new insignia on his uniform, a recent promotion. Heard they're issuing new rank pins, sir. Lighter alloy. Heard the colonel say it's so they can stack more stars on before your collar gives you a permanent hunch. It was a stupid joke, the kind juniors make to seem personable. Thorne's lips twitched, not quite a smile. He took a drag, exhaling smoke into the twilight. Rank has its privileges, Rao, and its burdens. You learn to carry both. Like an old, heavy rucksack you can never put down. He paused, his eyes distant, looking past the perimeter fence. Sometimes you wish you could just key in a reset code. A clean slate. Bravo, Zulu, 7, Niner, Alpha, Tango. Poof. Back to private. He chuckled a dry, raspy sound and stubbed out his cigarette. A man can dream. Back to work. He went inside. Maya stood for a second longer, the strange, melodic sequence of phonetics hanging in the air. Bravo, Zulu, 7, Niner, Alpha, Tango. It felt oddly specific for a throwaway example. Her analyst brain, trained to catch irregularities, filed it away as a curiosity. Days bled into weeks. The incident faded. Then, during a grueling late-night simulation, a complex drill involving a captured enemy communications protocol, Maya hit a wall. Her team was tasked with cracking a dummy code structure. The simulated enemy was using a layered encryption that mirrored an old, decommissioned system she'd read about in archival notes. The logic was circular, frustrating. In a moment of exhaustion and misplaced humor, trying to break the team's tension, she muttered into her headset, "Maybe we just need Captain Thorne's magic reset." Bravo, Zulu, 7, Niner, Alpha, Tango. Poof. Clean slate. The effect was not laughter. The chatter on the comms died instantly. The senior analyst beside her, a grizzled man named Sergeant Wells, slowly turned, his face pale. "What did you just say?" "Nothing, Sarge. Just a dumb joke. The captain said it once about rank being a burden you could reset. Repeat the sequence." "Exactly." Wells's voice was a low wire. Maya, confused, did so. Wells stood up so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He walked out without a word. 20 minutes later, Maya was summoned to the captain's office. The atmosphere was no longer stale, it was arctic. Captain Thorne stood behind his desk, but the granite was gone, replaced by something taut and dangerous. Wells was there, looking at the floor. Thorne's eyes pinned Maya where she stood. Where did you hear that code, specialist? No greeting, no preamble. From you, sir. That evening outside signals. You made a joke about a reset code for rank. Thorne's knuckles were white where he gripped the desk. I have never, in my life, used that sequence of words. You are mistaken. The denial was absolute, a wall slammed down. That is a classified, non-existent referent. Its utterance is a breach of security. Maya's mouth went dry. Sir, I swear, I just repeated what I heard you say. I thought it was just nonsense. A random example. It is not random. He leaned forward, the overhead light casting deep shadows under his eyes. You are to never speak it again. You are to forget you ever heard it. This conversation did not happen. Is that understood? This is not a request, Rao. This is an order for your safety and the security of this unit. Dismissed, Maya walked back to her bunk in a daze. The fear in Thorne's eyes had been real, but it wasn't the fear of a security breach he was angry about. It was the fear of a man who had seen a ghost, her own ghost, and she had been the one to summon it. The next morning, the changes began. Subtly at first. Her access logs were run. Her station was randomly inspected. Then, her clearance for the deep archives, which she used for historical protocol research, was revoked without explanation. Sergeant Wells avoided her completely. Captain Thorne's interactions were reduced to icy, professional monosyllables. The code was a key. She knew that now. And she had, without meaning to, rattled it in the lock of a door someone powerful wanted kept shut. The clean slate he'd joked about wasn't for rank. It was for something else. And the sheer, disproportionate reaction told her one thing with terrifying clarity. The secret behind that door was worth burying her for. The weight of the unknown settled on her shoulders, heavier than any rucksack. Her curiosity, once her greatest asset, had become a liability. And the man she was supposed to trust with her life was now the source of the silent, gathering threat. The base, once a familiar landscape of routine, had transformed into a maze of silent threats. Maya felt the change in the air, averted glances in the mess hall, the sudden cessation of conversation when she entered a room. The isolation was a deliberate tactic, she realized, meant to make her doubt her own memory, her own sanity. Captain Thorne's strategy was clear: quarantine the infection. Make the problem, her, disappear through silence and bureaucratic pressure. But the code, Bravo Zulu 79 Alpha Tango, burned in her mind. It was no longer a random string. It was a puzzle that held the reason for her professional unpersoning. She began to work in a state of heightened paranoid awareness. Her personal laptop, a civilian model, stayed in her locker. She used only her issued tablet for innocuous searches, knowing it was likely monitored. The real work happened in her head, and on scraps of paper she destroyed immediately. She started with what she knew: phonetics. B, 79 AT. It wasn't a standard call sign format. Could be a date. Bravo and Zulu could be B and Z, but 79 it meant nothing. A grid reference? The structure was wrong. A serial number? Too short. Her break came from a forgotten corner of her own past. During her advanced training, an old, retired communications officer had given a guest lecture on Cold War echoes, decommissioned systems, and the folklore that grew around them. He'd mentioned, almost in passing, a mythical beast called Project Looking Glass. It was a contingency communications network, so deeply buried and segmented that its activation codes were said to be spoken once, then forgotten, distributed among a handful of operatives who would never meet. The project was rumored to have been scrapped in the early 90s, a relic of a different kind of war. The lecturer had shrugged. Probably just a ghost story. But in our business, sometimes the ghosts are real. Spoken once, then forgotten. Thorne's desperate insistence that he'd never said the words took on a new, sinister meaning. What if he was telling a technical truth? What if the code was so sensitive it operated on a principle of plausible deniability by design? The speaker was meant to forget. The listener was never meant to exist. Maya needed to access the historical servers, the digital graveyard where old projects went to die. Her official access was gone. But she remembered Lisa Renfrew, an archivist in the records department. They'd bonded months ago over terrible coffee. Lisa was a civilian, outside the strict military chain, and she owed Maya a favor for helping her untangle a corrupted file. Their meeting was risky. Maya approached her in the base library, a place of quiet study. She slid a note across the table with a casual novel. Need a favor. Deep history. No traces. Coffee tomorrow, town. Lisa read it, her expression neutral. She gave a tiny nod, pocketed the note, and walked away. The next day, in a noisy civilian cafe 10 miles from the base, Maya laid out a sanitized version. I'm chasing a historical anomaly for a personal research paper. Pre-90s, DeepCom's protocols. My access got pulled. Can you run a broad, non-specific keyword scan? Something like GLASS or reset protocol in the decommissioned project indexes. Just see if anything pings. Lisa, intrigued by the cloak and dagger aspect, agreed. I can run a passive query. It won't log my search if I use the legacy terminal in the physical archives. But, Maya, if this is hot, it's just history, Maya lied, smiling. I promise. 2 days later, a slip of paper appeared in Maya's locker, wrapped around a protein bar. 3 words, barn. Section de 1430. The base's disused vehicle barn was vast and echoey, smelling of grease and old hay. At the far end, in a corner piled with obsolete radio equipment, Lisa waited, her face lit by the screen of an old tablet. You stirred up a ghost, she whispered. Project Looking Glass is real. Or was. Sealed under a presidential order in 1991. But here's the weird thing. The archive seal was accessed 6 months ago. A single query. No file pull, just a metadata check. Who accessed it? Maya's heart hammered. It's anonymized by high-level protocol. But the access terminal ID, it routes back to the Signals command suite. Lisa looked at her. That's Captain Thorne's domain. The pieces clicked with a terrifying clarity. Thorne hadn't just known the code from some ancient briefing. He had recently gone looking for its source. Why? What had prompted him, 6 months ago, to dig up a buried project? Before she could process it, Lisa grabbed her arm. There's more. I did a wider scan for BZ79 at. It's not just a code. It's an identifier. A clean slate identifier. She swiped the screen, showing a scanned fragment of document, so redacted it was mostly black bars. One line was partially visible. Operative designation BZ79 had to be considered sanitized upon utterance of primary code. All records divergent from cover legend are to be purged. Sanitized. Purged. The joke about a reset wasn't a joke. It was a function. A kill switch for an identity. Maya, what is this? Lisa's voice was trembling. This isn't history. This is active. At that moment, a beam of light from a flashlight cut through the dusty air. A voice called out, "This area is off limits for cleaning. You two need to leave. Now." It was Corporal Vance from base security. His presence was no coincidence. They separated quickly. That night, the fear was a physical thing, coiling in Maya's stomach. Thorne wasn't just trying to silence her. He was potentially a product of Project Looking Glass, a sanitized, operative living a cover legend. Her repeating the code wasn't just a security breach. It was a direct threat to the integrity of his manufactured existence. It was a crack in his foundation, and he was now checking to see how much she knew. The security sweep, the revoked access, it was a probe. She had to assume Lisa's query had left a faint trace. That Vance's appearance was a warning shot. She was in a chess game against a master, and she had just blindly moved a pawn into the center of the board. The only way out was to understand the whole board. She needed to know who Captain James Thorne really was, before Project Looking Glass gave him a clean slate. And She needed to know what he or the people he worked for had done that needed to be erased. The secret wasn't just a code. It was a man's past, and it was a past dangerous enough to kill for. Her next move had to be invisible. Paranoia became Maya's new operating system. She trusted nothing. Not the secure lines, not the empty corridors, certainly not the friendly faces that now seemed like potential masks. Lisa's help had been invaluable, but involving her further was unthinkable. The risk was too great. Maya was on her own. Her strategy shifted from active searching to passive listening and clever deduction. The base's mainframe was a fortress, but its human components were less secure. She began a campaign of what she thought of as ambient data collection. During her shifts, she kept one earpiece slightly off, tuning her hearing to the low murmur of the analysts around her. She volunteered for the mind-numbing task of digitizing old, paper-based signal logs from the late 80s and early 90s, a job no one wanted. It was in this dusty, forgotten paperwork that she hoped to find a shadow, a reflection of the ghost that was Project Looking Glass. The logs were a waterfall of mundane traffic, weather reports, supply requests, routine position updates. But as she scanned the microfiche from 1989, a pattern of anomalies emerged. Every 6 to 8 weeks, a specific high-frequency burst transmission was logged, originating from a classified source and destination. Its listed purpose was always comms check Project LG. The operator who logged it used the same initials each time, JT. Her blood ran cold. J.D. James Thorne would have been a young lieutenant around then. These logs placed him not as a consumer of the project's legend later in life, but as an active, ground-level participant in its operational phase. One afternoon, buried in a stack of requisition forms for specialized comms components, she found a carbon copy with a handwritten note in the margin, faded but legible, BZ Unit REQ approved. Cover for archaeologist team en route to Managua. Use Channel Sierra Whiskey only. Destroy this. The signature was a rush scrawl, but the first letter looked like a J. The date was October 12, 1989. Managua, Nicaragua. The height of the covert wars in Central America. Archaeologist. A cover for an insertion team. And BZ Unit. Not Bravo Zulu, but BZ. The prefix of the code. This was it. The operational reality behind the ghost. The puzzle was no longer abstract. It was about real people in a real conflict doing things so dark they required a mechanism for total erasure. Captain Thorne, the impeccable officer, had been there. He was JT, he had been part of the BZ unit. And the code BZ-79, that was his personal sanitization trigger. A new, more terrifying question emerged. If the code was his personal clean slate, why had he spoken it aloud, even as a joke? Was it a subconscious slip, a burden so heavy it leaked out? Or was it a test? Neither answer was comforting. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected and human source. Seeking a break from the microfiche glare, she wandered into the base's veterans lounge, a shabby room with old armchairs and a coffee pot that always smelled burnt. It was the domain of retired personnel who volunteered as maintenance or consultants. One of them was Frank Cobb, a 70-something former master sergeant with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He was known for his stories, most of which were tall tales. But he'd also served in signals in the right era. Maya approached him cautiously, offering to refill his coffee. "Sergeant Cobb, you were around in the late 80s, right?" "In signals." "Sure was, kid. Back when comms had more wire than wizardry. I'm digitizing the old logs. Came across some weird recurring traffic codes. Project LG. Ring any bells? Just trying to categorize it properly." Cobb's jovial expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened, becoming focused and very clear. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "LG, huh? Looking Glass. That's a name I haven't heard in a dog's age. Fairy tale stuff. But it was real. Real enough to get people disappeared," he said, his voice dropping. "Not literally, maybe, but scrubbed. You'd work with a guy on a tight-knit team for months. Then, one day he's gone. Not transferred. Gone. And his records would get fuzzy. Like he was never quite there the way you remembered. They called it getting a clean slate. We called it being sent through the glass. You'd see their reflection afterward, but it wasn't really them anymore. Just the legend. Maya's mouth was dry. Why? What did they do that needed that? Cobb looked at her for a long time, as if weighing her soul. We did what we were told, specialist. In places that don't exist on maps, for reasons that don't get written down. Sometimes the things you see, the things you have to do, they don't fit in a normal file. So they make a new file, a clean one, and burn the old. He leaned forward. Why are you asking about this? Just history, she whispered, but the excuse was hollow. Some history, Cobb said softly, is like live ordnance. You dig it up, it can still blow your hands off. Be careful what you're digging for, kid. He stood up, his joints creaking. And if you met someone who came out the other side of the glass, remember, they're living a life someone else wrote for them. That's a powerful kind of prison. A man might do anything to stay in it, or he trailed off, or to finally break out. He walked away, leaving Maya with a storm of new understanding. Thorne wasn't just guarding a secret. He was living inside it. He was the prisoner of his own cover legend. Her repeating the code hadn't just threatened to expose a past mission. It had threatened to shatter the very looking glass that held his current reality together. It was a key that could unlock his cell, but the world outside that cell might want him dead for what he knew. The man she feared was also, in a terrible way, a victim of the same machine. This changed everything. The confrontation was no longer about her exposing him. It was about two people trapped by the same ghost from the past. She needed to speak to him, not as a specialist to her captain, but as one bearer of a terrible truth to another. But how do you approach a man who has already shown he is willing to erase you to protect his fiction? She decided she wouldn't approach him. She would make him come to her. She would show him she knew enough to be dangerous, but also enough to perhaps understand. She would bait the hook with truth and see if the prisoner inside the legend would bite. The plan was a delicate, dangerous thing, built on inference and a desperate hope. Maya needed to send a message to Captain Thorne that was clear to him, but opaque to anyone else watching. She had to speak the language of his buried past. She waited for the next routine, overnight shift in the nearly deserted signals room. The graveyard hours were hers alone, with only a skeleton crew monitoring passive feeds. Using her station, she began to craft a dummy signal log entry. It was a skill she'd perfected, creating believable backdated data for training simulations. This one, however, was a work of art. She modeled it on the 1989 logs she'd memorized. The header was dated October 13th, 1989, the day after the archaeologist requisition she'd found. The source was a dummy identifier used in old exercises. The destination was blank. In the content field, she typed the exact language from the logs. Comms check. Project LGBZ unit reports insertion clean. Channel Sierra Whiskey active. No contact expected until extraction. JT. She printed it on the old, faded-style continuous feed paper kept for archives, carefully tore the edges, and gave it a subtle coffee-stained smudge. It looked like it had been in a box for 30 years. This was the bait. The delivery was the risky part. Captain Thorne's office was cleaned by a detail every morning at 0600. At 0550, Maya, pretending to be on an early errand, passed by the open door. The cleaner's cart was outside. With a practiced motion, as if adjusting her boot, she slipped the folded log sheet under the large, dusty potted plant that stood in the corner of his office, a spot just hidden enough from casual view, but where a man pacing might eventually look. Then she waited. Her workday was a performance of normalcy, every nerve screaming. She monitored the security camera's feeds she had legitimate access to, watching the corridor outside his office. At 1017 hours, she saw him enter after a meeting. At 10:48, she saw him storm out, his face a controlled mask of fury, heading straight for the signals room. He didn't enter the main floor. He went to the small, soundproofed observation booth that overlooked it, a room rarely used. Her console chimed with a direct, encrypted message, bypassing all open channels. 2 words, booth. Now, walking felt like moving through deep water. She entered the booth. He stood with his back to her, looking through the one-way glass at the unaware analysts below. The forged log sheet was on the console beside him. Where did you get this? His voice was low, stripped of all authority, raw with a tension she'd never heard. I made it, she said, forcing her voice steady. Based on what I found in the real archives. I needed you to know I'm not guessing. I know about Project Looking Glass. I know about the BZ unit. I know about Managua. And I know what BZ-79 means. A clean slate for JT. He turned. The Captain Thorne she knew was gone. In his place was a man hollowed out by fear and memory. The granite had cracked, revealing the weary, haunted man underneath. You have no idea what you're playing with. Then, tell me, she said, throwing caution away. Sir, you said the code out loud. To me, it wasn't an accident, was it? Part you wanted someone to hear it. To remember. The silence stretched. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since that evening. He saw not a threat, but a witness. A possible confessor. Managua, 1989, he began, the words coming out like stones. We weren't archaeologists. We were grave robbers. Our mission was to intercept and disappear a courier from the other side. He was carrying proof of financial arrangements. Payments from our side to factions we publicly condemned. A war within a war. It was ugly, but it was orders. He paused, his eyes seeing something far away. The intercept went hot. There was a firefight in a safe house. The courier was killed. So was a civilian. A girl, no more than 12. She'd been hiding in a closet. The air left the room. Maya stood frozen. It was a catastrophic compromise. Politically, morally, the kind that starts wars of a different kind. We were extracted in chaos. Back home, they didn't want soldiers with that memory walking around. So, Project Looking Glass. They gave us a choice, a quiet, honorable discharge with the knowledge forever locked inside, eating us alive, or a clean slate. A new legend, a new service record, the memory of that room medically softened. Our old identities, our old sins sanitized. BZ-79, that was my key. Speaking it to a designated controller would trigger the final purge of my James Thorne, Nicaragua file, leaving only James Thorne, spotless officer. I never used it. I chose to carry the rucksack, as I told you. I chose to remember that girl. Then, why say it to me? Maya whispered. Because the past isn't buried, he said, his voice cracking. 6 months ago, I got a message. A whisper. Someone from the old team, who took the clean slate. They were remembering. Fragments were surfacing. Their new life was fracturing. And the people who run Looking Glass, they don't fix cracks. They eliminate them. I looked up the project file to see if there was a protocol, a way to help. There wasn't. Just a code, sitting there like a loaded gun. That night with you, I was tired, Maya. So tired of carrying it. Saying it aloud felt like sharing the weight. A stupid, reckless moment of weakness. I never dreamed you'd remember it, let alone speak it back. The truth was vast and awful. He wasn't her enemy. They were both in the crosshairs. Her for knowing, him for remembering, and for his slip. They're monitoring, he said, nodding toward the floor below. Not just you. Me too, since your breach. My every move. The cleaner who found your note? One of theirs. They know you're digging. They're letting you dig to see what you find and who you tell. Maya felt the walls close in. The security sweeps, Vance in the barn. It wasn't just Thorne. It was a shadowy apparatus protecting its own secrets. What do we do? She asked, the we hanging in the air between them. You do nothing, he said, the command returning to his voice, but softer now. You stand down. I have to fix this. I started it. How? By using the code for what it was meant for, he said, his eyes bleak. I have to request a meeting with the controller. I have to activate my own sanitization. In doing that, I can set the terms. My price for walking through the glass again will be your complete safety. Your transfer, a clean record, no memory of this. They'll agree. A contained, two-person problem solved neatly. One person erased, one person cleared. He was offering to sacrifice his very self, his memories, his pain, his identity, to save her. The magnitude of it stunned her. "You can't," she breathed. "That girl, you'd forget her. Your penance would be gone." "Maybe that's the mercy I don't deserve," he said. "Or maybe remembering is a luxury I can no longer afford if it gets you destroyed." He picked up the forged log sheet and shredded it in a small cross-cut shredder in the corner. "The game is over, specialist. You win by walking away. Let me be the ghost. That's an order." He left her alone in the booth, staring at the empty space where he had been. She had gotten the truth, and it was a heavier burden than the mystery. The captain was walking into a void to save her, and the only way to stop him was to find a different solution, one that would outmaneuver the silent, watching machine that wanted to scrub them both from its ledger. The time for listening was over. Captain Thorne's sacrifice was a noble trap, and Maya refused to step into it. His plan relied on the good faith of the very system that had created Project Looking Glass, a system that sanitized problems, not solved them. She couldn't believe they would simply let her go. More likely, she'd have an accident after Thorne was safely erased, a loose end neatly tied off. No, survival demanded a different play. Not hiding the truth, but weaponizing it in the open where the shadows couldn't reach. Thorne was under surveillance. Any direct contact would doom them both. She needed a dead drop, a way to communicate her plan without meeting. She remembered Frank Cobb, the old sergeant. He was a wild card, a link to the past who moved unseen through the present. Risking his safety felt wrong, but he'd offered a warning. Perhaps he'd understand the need for action. She found him the next day, polishing brass on a memorial plaque near the base flagpole. With her back to the security camera, she slipped a folded note and a small, encrypted USB drive into the pocket of his jacket hanging on a nearby bench. The note read, "Frank, the ordnance is live. The man from the glass needs a spotlight, not a shroud. Get this to a journalist. The one who did the expose on drone pilots last year. Her email is on the drive. There's a cash stash for a burner phone in the lining. You were right. Some history blows up. The digger on the USB was a carefully constructed file, not the raw, explosive truth of Managua. She wouldn't unleash that trauma for Thorne or the victim's family. Instead, it contained the evidence of the cover-up, her analysis of the anomalous log patterns, the archived requisition with the BZ unit note, the metadata proof of Thorne's recent access to the sealed Project Looking Glass file, and a clear, factual narrative explaining how a casual joke led to the discovery of an active, illegal personnel sanitization program within the military. It named no names from the past, but it shone a glaring light on the present machinery of erasure. It made the story about the system, not the soldier's sin. Her cover note to the journalist ended. Asterisk, the code is BZ79 at. The man who carries it is a prisoner. Freeing him exposes the jailers. Asterisk then, she made her own move. She requested a formal, on-the-record meeting with the base executive officer, Major Carson, citing concerns about operational security and attempted coercion. It was a nuclear option. The meeting would be logged, noted, and impossible to completely disappear. In the sterile office, with a legal affairs officer present, Maya laid out a carefully edited version. She spoke of hearing a strange code, of her captain's disproportionate reaction, of revoked accesses, and feeling surveilled. She presented it as a young specialist fearing she'd stumbled into something above her pay grade and wanting to report it through proper channels for her own protection. She never mentioned Managua or the girl. She made it a story about a code and a cover-up, not a massacre and a memory. The effect was instantaneous and tectonic. By going official, she had taken the ghost story and stamped a case number on it. Major Carson, a political creature, was horrified. A scandal brewing in his command was a career killer. The legal officer took meticulous notes. Maya was placed on administrative leave, effectively in protective custody on base, her access stripped, but her safety now a matter of visible record. The ripple reached Thorne immediately. He was summoned to the same office. Maya, from her temporary quarters, watched through her window as he marched across the quad. Back straight, the perfect officer once more. He was playing his part, heading into the storm she had created. She later learned from the scuttlebutt that filtered down. Thorne, confronted with her official statement, did not deny the code. He confirmed it was a highly classified decommission protocol. He admitted to overreacting out of an overabundance of caution and a desire to protect a junior officer from stumbling into complex historical matters. He took full responsibility for the miscommunication and undue stress. It was a masterful performance, throwing himself on his sword to contain the damage, just as he'd planned to do in the shadows. But now he was doing it in the light with witnesses. 2 days later, the outside world intervened. A national security journalist with a sterling reputation published a detailed, sourced report online, the Clean Slate Code, inside the military's secret erasure program. It was Maya's dossier, fleshed out with the journalist's own investigation. It didn't name Thorne or Maya, using pseudonyms, but it described the signals analyst and the captain with chilling accuracy. The story went viral within the intelligence community. The Pentagon launched an Inspector General investigation. Project Looking Glass was suddenly a headline. The shadowy controllers were no longer hunting in silence. They were under a microscope. In the end, it was the glare, not the truth, that decided their fates. The apparatus could not sanitize a story that was national news. The cleanup became damage control. Captain James Thorne was not erased. He was quietly, honorably, early retired. The official reason was the cumulative strain of service. He received a full pension, his record, both of them, left untouched. The message was clear: go away and be quiet. Specialist Maya Rao was offered a choice: a full honorable discharge with a significant hardship bonus and a guarantee of no repercussions, or a reassignment to a completely different field in a new command, with all records of the incident sealed. She took the discharge. Some battles left you too changed to stay in the Army. On her last day, a plain envelope was in her mailbox. No note. Inside was a single, old photograph, creased and faded. It showed a group of 5 young soldiers, relaxed, smiling in a jungle clearing. One was a younger Thorne. On the back, in faded ink, Managua, 89, BZ unit. And below that, in fresh pen, thank you for the clean slate. This one is mine. Jite. He hadn't forgotten. He had chosen to keep his burden, but now he carried it as a free man, released from the prison of his legend. She had given him not a sanitization, but an exoneration from the machine. Maya walked out of the gates for the last time, the weight gone. The code was just a sequence of letters and numbers. Now its power broken. The secret had shaken the captain, but in the end, it had not destroyed him. It had, in a strange and painful way, set them both free. The joke about rank had led not to a demotion, but to a mutual, hard-won promotion to a simple, unclassified truth. They were human, and they had survived.